Well, we're going to be today in Genesis chapter 26. So if you have a Bible, meet me in Genesis chapter 26. Not a place you often read in the Bible, I guess, so you'll probably need to use the table of contents to find it. Fortunately, Genesis is the very first book in the Bible, and chapter 26 is just the 26th chapter in that very first book of the Bible. So not that hard to find. Genesis chapter 26. We're going to look at a paragraph from verse 17 to 22. Genesis chapter 26, beginning in verse 17. It's normal to begin a new year with meditations on new beginnings and fresh starts and resolutions and all of that stuff. And today I want to do something similar to that, but slightly different. Because Genesis 26 teaches something that I think we don't just need to have in mind at the beginning of the year, but that we need to pursue together as a church for the entire year. So I'm not preaching this as here's a reminder at the beginning of the year sermon, but rather to set the mood and to set the theme for what we're going to do all year long together as a church. When spring rolls around and the trees start to bloom and the weather starts to warm up and the days get longer, we'll still be doing Genesis 26. And when summer comes and we're all sufficiently vaccinated and we can begin to take off our masks in public, we'll still be doing Genesis 26. And when fall rolls around and your kids finally go back to school in person, we'll still be doing Genesis 26. And when Advent comes, we're going to do an Advent in what we're talking about in Genesis 26. So I want to hang this paragraph we're going to read today as a banner over the whole year. And I want you to hear it in light of the challenges that confront us right now, especially as followers of Jesus. I think we should be especially concerned about the state of the church. I mean that in the capital C sense, of the state of the world right now. And I don't have to remind you or rehash the difficulties of last year, and I don't have to remind you that they did not magically disappear when the clock struck midnight on January 1. But I do want to take a minute and I want to reflect on the challenges we face, because I want us to read and hear Genesis 26 in light of where we are right now. And I think we can describe the challenges we face like this. Two rivers have run together and flooded. Both of these rivers started as small streams high in the mountains. They flowed separately for years and years and years. And they gradually picked up water as they flowed downstream, and many tributary creeks flowed into them. And in 2020, they merged and they flooded, and we're bailing water from the basement because of the flood of these two rivers. Now, in saying that, I'm saying that the challenges we face right now as a church, as a people, are not just the result of last year. Rather, the challenges we face are deeper. They've been forming longer. 2020 was really just the flood, or it was just the overflow of these. But they're actually deeper than 2020. So I want to describe these two rivers. The first river we're going to call the fragmentation of the church. And I mean church in the capital C sense, and I'm thinking here particularly about the church in our society or in our country, in America. By fragmentation, I mean that the church seems to be broken into tribes and divisions, and there's a lot of animosity between these tribes and divisions, and a lot of disagreement and confusion on the best way forward. Much of this fragmentation is due to sin in the leadership of the church. The last few years have been apocalyptic in exposing sin among prominent Christian pastors and missionaries, exposing abuses of power, sexual infidelity, pride. And it's led to the dissolution sometimes of entire churches or entire ministries and the scattering of people. So we've been fragmented because of sin and leadership. At the same time, we seem to be very divided. There seems to be a lot of anger within the capital C church on matters of culture, race, and politics. Christians seem to despise and refuse to associate with other Christians who believe the same things about God and Jesus that they believe. and yet don't believe the same things they believe or don't see cultural problems, political problems in quite the same way. And so, it seems that culture and race and politics are more powerful realities in the church right now than the death and the resurrection of Jesus. Another way to say this would be this. There really is no coherent, positive, widespread movement that I could point to right now and say, that's like the future of the church in America. I've pastored for 15 years, which means I'm not old, but I am middle-aged. Middle-aged is not old, but it's not young either. It's 15 years in. I'm 15 years in. And one of the things I've been reflecting on for the last year is how different the state of the church, the Christian environment in our country is compared to where it was 15 years ago when I began the work of starting this church. 15 years ago, if you wanted to follow Jesus, if you believed the gospel of Jesus, if you were committed to the Bible and to Orthodox theology, if you wanted to love and serve the world, if you wanted to do the work of leading people to faith in Jesus, discipling people as followers of Jesus, serving and loving those on the margins of our society, healing the problems of our world, if you just want to do that basic work, which what Christians have done throughout history, you were like in the mainstream of Christianity in America. In the 1940s and 50s, a movement had arisen that called itself at the time neo-evangelicalism. It later got shortened to evangelicalism. And the driving spirit of this movement was to be faithful to the Scriptures, be faithful to Jesus, do the work of evangelism, do the work of serving and loving the poor, disciple people. It built large ministries. It built prominent churches. It was a very healthy movement. It was pretty theologically diverse. It was even pretty culturally diverse, and it was becoming more and more ethnically and racially diverse. But in the last 15 years, that movement is fractured. It's fractured due to sin in leadership, due to division over race and culture and politics. It's fractured due to false teaching from some of its prominent teachers. It's produced all kinds of weirdness. And so the result is you can't point to something right now and go like, that's the big movement that seems to be holding together the church in our society. So I want to just call this the fragmentation of the church river. The second river that's also been gaining steam, we're going to call it the fragmentation of post-Christian culture. Now, if the first river is about what has been happening in the church, this river is about what's been happening in the world. And sometimes the term used for our world is that it's secularizing, but I think the term post-Christian is actually more descriptive, more accurate. Post-Christian just acknowledges that we as a culture are living post after the historic influence of Christianity has spread throughout our culture and has now begun to wane. So, like when you read the New Testament, you're reading about a church living in a pre-Christian world. The gospel of Jesus was beginning to spread and beginning to permeate throughout the Greco-Roman world, but it had not yet had widespread influence, and so to be a Christian was to be minority, and many people didn't even know what Christianity was. But in a post-Christian world, the influence of Christianity has spread for 2,000 years almost throughout that culture, and now most people think they know what it is, and they're beginning to move away from it, and one of the defining characteristics of post-Christian culture is that not only are they kind of like moving away from Christianity, but they actually now see Christianity as bad. They see it as a threat. They see it as a threat to justice. They see it as a threat to the world they long for. That's the world we live in. It's post-Christian, but that world is also fragmenting. It includes both what we would call the left and the right, culturally and politically, in our world, and that world is also fragmenting. If you watch the post-Christian world try to hash out issues of justice and politics, they can't do it. They can't do it in a way that brings social cohesion to our world. That world is divided, angry, vindictive, unforgiving, unmerciful. It is ugly. So what's happened is that the church is fragmenting at the same time the world is fragmenting. And these two rivers have run together. And in 2020, they just overflowed their banks. So if you're a follower of Jesus, you live in the turbulent waters of both of these rivers coming together. And then 2020 was like a flood. 2020 disrupted all of our daily habits that we use to sustain life. 2020 disrupted many of the relationships that were life-giving. 2020 aggravated all the cultural tensions, both inside and outside the church. This week I was reading one of my favorite authors, Jen Pollock Michelle. I was reading her reflections on last year and how it impacted followers of Jesus in particular. And she wrote this. She said, after a year like 2020, our relationships are showing wear. We've fractured over all kinds of issues, and public health restrictions have limited our ability to gather, to hug, to worship, shoulder to shoulder. It's the perfect storm for misunderstanding and for eroding our will to keep at the hard, patient work of Christian unity. She's just reflecting on how the divisions in the church and in the culture have affected us as followers of Jesus. Now, I'm laying those observations before you, heavy as they are, because I want us to be sobered as we come to Genesis 26. I don't want us to despair. You might even not fully agree with how I just summarized those rivers. That's fine if you don't agree with how I summarized those rivers. That was a gross, oversimplified summary, so I probably wouldn't agree with it if I examined it in more detail, and they gave me an hour and a half to preach like they used to when we started this church. There's like two people who are still like, I liked it when you preached for an hour. But some things have changed around here. Remember, 15 years, I'm middle-aged now. So they give me 42 minutes. These two rivers flowing together should cause us to be sober. They should not cause us to despair. I want us to ask, in light of this, how do we respond as followers of Jesus? What should we focus on? What do we need? And that's why I want to read Genesis 26. Now, here's what Genesis 26 is. Genesis 26 is kind of like the flyover part of Genesis. So it's the part that it's like the Nebraska of Genesis. It's like you've got the East Coast, the creation narrative, and you got the West Coast, which ends in the Exodus. And this is kind of the middle part that you don't spend much time in. But Genesis 26 teaches something that I just want to hang as a banner over the whole year. We're going to call this banner Rebuild and Renew. It first came to my awareness reading the sermons of one of the great preachers of the last century, Martin Lloyd-Jones of London. He was a medical doctor who became a preacher, so he's sometimes referred to as the doctor. And the doctor preached 6 sermons on revival from 2 verses in Genesis chapter 26. In fact, I would recommend you get and read his book called Revival by Martin Lloyd-Jones. You'll probably have to get it on Kindle format because I think it's out of print. But he preached 6 sermons on revival from Genesis chapter 26, verse 17 and 18. Here's what's happening in Genesis 26. Isaac is the son of Abraham. And as the son of Abraham, he is the custodian of God's promises of redemption. Or to use our language, he is the custodian of the proto-gospel. God is with him. In fact, toward the end of this chapter, God appears to him again. He goes, hey, just remember, man, I am with you. And then some of the surrounding nation sees him and they go, we sense that God is with you. God is with Isaac. God has called him. God is asked him to carry this promise that he first gave to Abraham, this promise that will flower in the birth of Jesus and the multitude of people across all nations for 2,000 years now who have come to faith in Jesus. Isaac is the steward of this promise in which we now live, which we now steward, and the nation, the culture in which Isaac lives, is groaning and suffering. It's groaning because of a natural disaster. A famine has unsettled much of the population where he lives. In fact, the nation in which Isaac lives, the Philistines, have turned against him. They've perceived him as a threat, and they've actually kicked him out of his home. So Isaac, the bearer of the promise, is displaced from his home, and he's got to find a new home. He's got to rebuild. He's got to start over. So he settles in a place called the Valley of Gerar. It's a place that his father, Abraham, once lived, although he's never lived there. But he probably heard his father tell stories about it. So he journeys to the Valley of Gerar, and he begins to settle there. And so I'm interested in this story because it's a story of starting over and rebuilding and reestablishing life after a great disruption by the man who bears God's promise and bears God's presence, just as the Church of Jesus still does. So I want us to read this paragraph, Genesis chapter 26, verse 17 and following. So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that also. So he called its name Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it, so he called its name Rehoboth, saying, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." Isaac has an urgent need for water. That's what this whole paragraph is about. He's trying to find water. He's trying to establish a reliable source of water. Now, water is almost synonymous with life itself because it is the most basic need of life. In fact, you need water even more than you need food. Water makes everything else possible. So before he can build a life, before he can build a home, before he can activate his Netflix subscription in his new home, he's got to get water. So the point is that he's not looking for some improvement to his life. He's not looking for some escape from pain. He doesn't need some recreation to kind of add some joy to his life. His need is more basic and more urgent than that. He needs water. I want to suggest that that's our situation. It's easy in our present circumstance to misdiagnose our need because many of the things that adorned our lives were taken away last year. And it's easy to think we just need those things back. We just need the kids to go back to school. We just need to get back to traveling and going to concerts and eating out at restaurants and hugging grandma. And those are all good things. And I want all of those things back. But we need something more basic than that. We need water. It's why I spent some time sketching out the problems we're facing. It's why I wanted us to see the challenge we're living in now as deeper than just 2020 was a bad year. I wanted us to see the problems we're facing now as deeper than pandemic and politics have disrupted our lives. I wanted us to see that these rivers have been building and growing. When you see our situation accurately, you know that we need something more basic than just getting back some of the good things that 2020 took away. We need life itself. Now, this is why the doctor preached so many sermons on these two verses. He wrote in 1959, He wrote, the trouble I see with the church today is that she does not realize, as she should, that her primary need and her urgent need at the moment is the need of life itself. The problem confronting us is not a problem of methods or of organization or of making a slight adjustment here and there or of improving things a little bit. It seems to me that we are really down to this basic issue. We need water. Now, I want you to notice that's not all this paragraph teaches us, because I want us to notice how Isaac went about finding water. Look at verse 18. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names, the same names that his father had given them. He did not search for a new source of water. He didn't prospect for new wells. He didn't invent a new water technology. He didn't call in the water diviners. He went back to the old and the known sources of water, the proven sources of water. When you hear old, when you hear me say old, I'm afraid I'm going to say old a few times today. When you hear me say old, just hear proven. He went back to the old and the known sources of water. It's very tempting to think, we have new problems, we need new solutions. But the need of water, the need of life itself, for the church, the need of spiritual life, the need of the life of God, the need of the living water that Jesus talked about, it's not a new problem. It's not a new problem. It might have taken a different manifestation than previously, but the problems we face are not new. Now, if you read earlier in Genesis, here's what you would see. Abraham had a lot of faults. It's tempting to read the Old Testament and read these people as like just heroes. Abraham was kind of a rascal. He had a lot of faults, just like probably your own parents did. If you've done any counseling, you've learned you've learned in detail, you've examined in detail all the problems of your parents. But you know, sometimes, like, despite their faults, your parents are good at a couple of things. There's like a couple of things you can point to and you can say, my home wasn't perfect, but I tell you what, my parents were good at this. My dad was good at this. My mom was good at this. And if you study Abraham like that, you'll learn that the thing he was really good at was finding water. That man could find water. Abraham was a water finder. That dude he just had a nose for where to dig a well. He dug some good wells. And so Isaac reasons. You can see what he's thinking. He's reasoning like, my need is urgent. I need water. I don't have time to mess around with innovation. What if I just went back to the sources of water that are known? My father was really good at finding water. If you study the history of the church, you would learn that, like, our condition today is not new. The church has often gone through periods where it's fractured and fragmented, and they've often lived in a world that is fractured and fragmented. One of the great books in the history of the church was written by Augustine, or as people without PhDs say, Augustine. And Augustine/Augustine wrote a book called The City of God. And he wrote it when the Roman world in which the church had thrived in was beginning to fracture and fragment and fall apart. And he wrote it to say, hey, all the Christians were freaking out because the world was going to hell in a handbasket. They had like all these alarmist podcasts about how awful the world is, And he wrote The City of God to say, hey, don't freak out. Because God is still with his church regardless of what's going on in the world. So Even if the world is fractured and fragmented, we should have hope that God can renew and sustain his people, his church. The city of God is not the city of man. If you read history, you'll just see the church has lived through similar times. It's lived through times like the ones we're living in. It's lived through times when the church itself is fractured and fragmented. The story of the church doesn't just look like the first few chapters of Acts. They just look like everything is awesome and keeps growing bigger and bigger and thousands come to faith. It looks more like a stock market chart. Seasons of advancement, seasons of decline, seasons of renewal and revival. So the church has discovered water over and over again in the midst of dry seasons. So if we're living through something that's happened many times before, and if we have the same need, we would be foolish not to learn from the experiences of those who have gone before us and to drink from the same wells that they drunk from. Now, this is pretty difficult for modern people because we're really good at innovation. Like culturally, we're really good at innovation. And we love new technology. In fact, how are we going to get out of this pandemic? We invented a new technology. Our scientists, who are very similar to the magicians of ancient culture, they're the experts we rely on to get us out of jams and to tell us what's going on. Our scientists have discovered and crafted a new technology, mRNA vaccine technology. It's amazing when you read about it. You can actually be vaccinated against the virus without even getting a small dose of it. It's completely different than old vaccinations used to be. It like sends a little code to your DNA that causes it to build antibodies against the coronavirus. But the question I'm asking is, what if the way the church recovers her vitality is not the same way that we get out of the coronavirus pandemic? What if we don't need new technology? What if we need old wells to be unstopped? Now, this is even harder because modern people tend to be biased against the generations that have gone before them. In fact, the whole way we study history, I just want you to observe the way modern people study history. History, if you study history, you would see there are massive errors in history that we should learn from and be sobered by, and there's a lot of wisdom that people that went before us had. Modern people tend to study history not, though, to collect the wisdom, but primarily to expose and understand the errors. Most of the history books that you read are history books describing the errors of generations that have gone before us. Isaac says, what if there's wisdom in the generation that went before me? He could have exposed Abraham's errors. In fact, there's several episodes where Abraham takes his wife and he pretends that she is not his wife so that other people won't be jealous of him. He completely sells out his wife. Doesn't protect her. It's a far cry from husbands love your wives like Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. It's brutal. I mean, Abraham, do not learn marriage from Abraham. But you can learn how to find water. So Isaac has an appropriate view of his father. He surely knows his faults, but he also knows the wisdom of history, and he knows my dad knew how to dig some wells. Say what you will about him, he knew how to find water. So he goes back to the old sources, but there's a problem. The Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. They'd stopped up these wells, so he had to redig the wells. He fortunately had a big crew with him, a big posse, what we would call a posse, what the Bible calls servants. He had a posse. And they start redigging these wells. In fact, you even read in the story there how they redug a couple of them, and the the locals quarreled with them. And so they were like, fine, you know what, fine. You can have that well because you know what? My dad was so good at digging wells, he didn't just dig a couple. He dug another one, so we'll just find one you don't know about. And he just kept moving on till he could redig one of the wells that Abraham had dug, and they didn't fight with him about it, and he's like, we'll settle here. He had to dig. He had to dig. He had to work to re-access the old water wells. But when he dug, you know what he found? They still worked. They still worked. Martin Lloyd-Jones says, any reading of church history, even that which is cursory and superficial, will, I think, bring out this principle abundantly clearly, that every time you get one of these great, glorious, mighty periods, you will find that in every instance it seems to be a returning to something that the church had obtained before. Every time the church is revived, she seems to be doing what Isaac did. She is going back to something that had happened before, rediscovering it, and finding that ancient supply. That's the banner I want to put over this whole year. That's what we're going to pursue together all year. We're going to call it rebuild and renew. We could add the word redig. We're not just rebuilding what was lost in 2020, but we're going back to known sources of water, and we're clearing out debris, and we're clearing out stuff that stopped them up. We're going to unstop the old wells. Now, I just want to share for a couple of minutes that I have left the digging plan. Here's what our digging plan looks like for the rest of this year. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to go back and we're going to try to rediscover and reappreciate old, proven truths. And we're going to try to draw fresh water from them. Now, we do that every week here. This is why we read the Bible. Like, that's not a new thing. Like, oh, we haven't read the Bible in a while. We should try reading it again. So, in some sense, that's not a new habit for us. But this year, we're going to emphasize going back to the foundational. I don't want to say basic, because basic is a word in our vernacular that means like simple and shallow and unsophisticated. But it's also a word that means foundational. We're going to go back to the foundational things that establish our life with God. And we're not going to just skim the surface of them. We're going to take some time. And we're going to examine every one of them, and we're going to try to draw some water from it. Now, here's how we're going to do that. Wrestle to all fall. How do we do that? How do we do that? Here's what we've decided to do. We're going to follow this year in our Sunday teaching, and some of your kids will be following it as well. You can do this as a family. You can do this as an individual as well. We're going to follow what's called the New City Catechism. Now, I brought a copy of the hardback with me, or the paperback version of the New City Catechism. Now, here's what a catechism is. A catechism is questions and answers that are meant to teach us the foundational elements of our faith. And in this particular catechism, it's a method Christians have been using for hundreds of years. This one was written in modern times based on older catechisms. So it is even in the spirit of what we're talking about doing. It's playing on the wisdom of those who've gone before us and redrawing it for modern times. And it's written with 52 questions. 52 questions. And the first question, for example, says this: what is our only hope in life and death? Now, if you know that and you can draw water from that, you'll have a rich and abundant life. And then it answers like this: that we are not our own, but belong, body and soul, both in life and death, to God and to our Savior, Jesus Christ. 52 questions. And what you'll find when you read these 52 questions is like, there are things there that I haven't thought about in a while. There are themes there that I haven't preached on in a while. There are themes there I haven't meditated on in a while. So we're going to use this as the basis for our teaching and our learning on Sundays. We're going to use this because it gives us a broad, robust diet of old water. Each one of these has multiple Bible passages from which it's drawn. And so what we're going to do each week is we're going to take one question of the New City Catechism, and then we're going to look at a passage. We're going to exposit a passage in Scripture that draws out the water that question's asking. So we're starting next week with question number 1. Now, I'd encourage you to get a copy of this. You can get a paperback copy of this, and it's not long. It wouldn't take you long to read it. It's just that it's in like 74-point font. So you can get a paperback copy of this, but there's also the same thing is available as a free app for your tablets or your smartphones. And it also has some additional little reading in it in the app. So I think you would really enjoy having it on your device. You might enjoy having a paperback copy as well, and we have those out in our bookstall here, or you can order it online. And we're going to spend 45 of our 52 sermons this year are going to come from the questions of the New City Catechism. Now, the second thing we're going to do is we're going to reestablish old proven habits that lead us to water. And today I just want to talk about one habit, and that's the habit of corporate worship, of gathering together with God's people to worship. We might think of it like this. In 2020, we were forced to adopt some new technology. Worship at home is new technology. It's new, it's innovative. I've never done my dishes while going to church until 2020. It was amazing to me how on Sundays when I wasn't preaching and I was worshiping at home, how I had a sudden penchant to do housework that I had never done before. I got so much cleaning done during church. While church was on my TV, oh, there's Michael preaching, and there's some dust in my house. It's new, it's different, it was innovative. I made a BLT one time while Dave was preaching. It's a good BLT, sourdough bread, that of course I baked myself because it was 2020. That's new. But there's something about being together in each other's presence, even if it's spaced out a little bit. There's something about hearing each other sing. There's something about the focus. I want a BLT so badly right now, but I cannot make one because I'm here and I don't have a kitchen. And my house is dirty right now, and I can't clean it because I'm here. And because I can't clean my house because I'm here, that means I have to be present with you in a way I'm not present when I'm making BLTs and dusting the furniture. So, to the extent we can, I want us to try old technology this year of worshiping together. Here's how we're going to do that. In February, we're going to start having 3 Sunday morning services. And one of them will continue to be live streamed so that those of you who need to worship at home, or those of you who are out of town and are joining us from out of town, if you're joining us from out of town, one of the great privileges of this last year was we got to include people in the life of our body who aren't physically in Denver. That was an incredible privilege of 2020. We're going to keep including you. My hope would be that you would also have a local body where you are, that you're connected to and that you can worship with, and then what we do here would just be supplementary. But that was one of the great things. We're going to continue to stream a service every Sunday. Some of you are going to need to remain distant because of health reasons. or because of risk factors. And so until this pandemic is completely over, it's over, that's your reality, and we don't want to make light of that. We don't want to make light of that. We don't want to make you feel bad about that. You're just being smart. You're being wise. But starting in February, we're going to have 3 Sunday morning services, and the purpose of doing 3 is this. They're going to be small enough that we can continue to socially distance in the sanctuary, but there's enough room that many people can worship in person every week, regularly. Last year, when we started having in-person spots, like 50 of them, you had to kind of go like, do I want to take some spots this week, or do I want to leave those for some other people? And here's what I want you to know. If you're ready to rebuild this habit of gathering with God's people to sing and to hear His word and to wave and to say hi, if you're ready to do that, there's room for you, and you don't have to make a judgment about, is there enough room, is there not enough room? There's room for you. There's room for you. If you want to make room for more people, you can just come to the latest service we have. Because we know everyone wants to come earlier. So you can just come to the latest one if you're feeling altruistic. So we're going to begin rebuilding the habit. We're going to follow all the local health guidelines. We're not going to try to be risky. We're not trying to prove some point. We're just simply trying to rebuild the habits that are healthy for us as followers of Jesus and do it in a way that's conducive. And so we're going to have 3 services. Now, it's a massive undertaking for our staff. They are working so hard to give that to you as a gift because they love you. We're going to invite some of you into that, not just in attending, but helping us to do that. You're going to help reestablish this. Yesterday I read Ezra and Nehemiah, 2 books in the Old Testament about Jerusalem being rebuilt. And I was struck over and over again by how they named the people who were rebuilding the city. Their names are there. Some of your names are going to be on this project. Can't wait to share that with you. So we're going to go back to old sources of truth, and we're going to go back to old habits that help us drink regularly from the water. And here's the hope we have. Here's the hope we have. Jesus Christ is always personally present with His church. He said at the end of Matthew, I'm with you always till the end of the age. When you get to the book of Revelation in the Bible, like the churches have some problems. And what's astounding to me is despite their problems, Jesus is present in those churches. He's speaking to these churches. He's correcting. He's encouraging. His presence is still there with His people. And so our hope this year is that Jesus' presence is still with us. And when we go back and we redig the old wells and we drink from the old sources of water, we'll find new life. 2021. Let's pray. Father, thank you that we have the promise of life. Thank you that the source of water that Jesus gave us, He called a stream of water welling up to eternal life that will never run out. So I pray this year that you would help us just to dig from it, to dig for it and to drink from it and to enjoy it. Would you refresh us? Would you renew us? We ask all of this with hope in Jesus' name and by His Spirit. Amen.